Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Shevuot Daf Bet. Today's stuff is sponsored by Rabbi Art Gould in gratitude to Hashem for helping me to find a new partner to love and be loved by and to walk with on a new journey. Okay, with that, we will get started. We are in the middle of a series of cases where we have an argument between two sides. Was the loan paid back? Was the loan not paid back? And we're going to continue with another few cases like that. So case number 5, bottom of Mem Aleph Amud Bet. 2 lines from the bottom. Somebody says to his friend, so there was a case where a person said to his friend, please bring me 600 zuz that you owe me. Did I not pay you back already 100 kabim, which is a weight, right? A kab, or a volume measurement, actually. 100 kabim of apatzim, which are gall nuts. Gall nuts come up a bunch of times in the Gemara. If you're curious about them, what exactly gall nuts are, so I recommend you read Flashback this week. It's an excellent article. She even mentioned, unfortunately, a soldier who was killed in the recent war who did a whole thing in 12th grade about apatzim and other types of things that people use for ink. Really interesting. So it's a great article. You should read it. Anyway, says, I gave you back, it's kind of secondary to our whole case, but I gave you back already 100 kav of apatzim, which are the rate of price for apatzim were 6 b'shita shita, 6 zuz for a kav. Now do the simple math. 6 times 100 is 600. So I gave you back all these gall nuts in payment for the loan. Amar le. So now he doesn't say you didn't pay me back gall nuts. What he says is the creditor said, Amar le lav ba'ar ba'avukaime. Were they not four zuz for an apatz? For a kav of apatzim? Meaning you only gave me 400. You didn't give me 600. Okay, now he doesn't actually say you gave me, and that's what's interesting. And there's going to be a little bit of a disagreement among the commentaries here on exactly what happens at the end. But what he says is, I disagree with you about the rate. So even if you're right that you pay me back, you only pay me 400. So atu, right? It's 400 for four zuz for a kav, right? And it was 100 kavim. Okay. If 2 witnesses come, the 2 witnesses do not testify that the borrower gave back money to the creditor or gave back the apatzim. All that witnesses come and testify was the difference between the 2 of them. We have one says the rate was 6 zuzim, one said for a kav, and the other one says it was 4 zuzim for a kav. So come the witnesses and they say, oh, the rate was 4. So now, Amar Rava, Huchsa Kafran. Rava says these witnesses proved that the the borrower, was a liar. I want you to go back for a minute. The previous case, if you don't remember, the last case we saw, Rav Sheshet had said the person was Huchsa Kafran. Okay, if you remember the case, he said, I return you the money in front of so-and-so and so-and-so, and then so-and-so and so-and-so show up and they're like, it wasn't in front of us. And then Rav Sheshet said, obviously, that guy was lying. And then we had the 2 different interpretations to who they were referring to. But Rava said people don't remember things like that. Okay, whether it was the witnesses don't remember that they happened to see the guy return the money because no one told them to be witnesses, or the person didn't remember who you returned the money in front of, who were the witnesses. So now Rava, the big one who said, oh, not Huchsa Kafran, people don't remember these kind of things, says Huchsa Kafran. So Amarami Barchama. Barchama throws Rava's words in his face and says, Ha'amar, didn't you say? People don't remember things like that. Like, do you remember what the price of the items was at the time of the loan, at the time you returned it? People don't remember that kind of thing. Of course, people remember the rate. That's something, and again, this is a whole debate. What do we assume people remember and what do we not assume people remember? By the way, if you think about it, some people have better memories than others also. So some people can't remember what they ate for breakfast, this morning. So basically they say that is the kind of thing. And if you think about it, if you go to the store, you kind of do remember the prices, right? It's something you deal with all the time. And you remember the prices of basic items. I don't know if walnuts were a basic item, but you can read the article of Shuli Mishkan and tell me what you think, if you think they're basic items or not. But in any case, I guess if you're a sofer, then it definitely would be a basic item. So either which way, we now say that, Rava claims that this is not one of those things you would forget, and therefore he's a liar. Now, here we have a very interesting debate among the commentaries. If the person's a liar, so what happens in the case? Now, if you notice, the malveh, the creditor, never agreed that the person had paid him back the gallnuts. All he said was, if you're claiming you pay back the gallnuts at a rate of 6 zuz, you're wrong about the rate, and it would only be 4 zuz. So if now in the end the lova is a liar, some commentaries say, and actually he has to return the entire amount, because it's not like the malva ever agreed with him that I got the 100 kav of gallnuts for the price of 4. Some people say no. The malva said, "Oh yeah, I got what he meant was, I got the gallnuts, but they were only 4, and therefore you only owe me 200 zuz." So there's a debate about what the bottom line was about the sugya. Next case. Bring me back the 100 shekel that you owe me. And here's a star. Now, usually you pull out a star that says, person owes you. That's pretty strong. But Amarle, Praticha, said, I paid you back. Now, the Malva agrees that he was paid back that amount of money. However, the Malva says, Amarle, Hanu Sitcha, that was for a different loan. That was for a loan we had an oral agreement about. You had 2 loans with me. And now the question is the Malva believed? Okay? Or do we say, wait a minute, if the Malva agrees that that amount of money was returned to him, that already weakens this star. And then if it weakens the star, there's a debate among the commentaries what exactly that means. Can he, can the lova just say, I paid you back, take a Shevuot Hesed and be done? Or does it just mean it's weakened, but it's still there? Anyway, there's a debate about this. But there's a debate whether even we weaken the loan or not. So Amar Rav Nachman, Itra Shara. Nachman says that document is weakened. Rav Papa Amar, Lo Itra Shara. That document is not weakened. In other words, what this is a debate about is the Malva believed to say, yes, I got the money back, but that was for a different loan when they have a star in hand. Because they have a star, on the other hand, right, just because they have a star doesn't mean if they're even admitting they got money back, maybe we can't accept the star. So we talked about this before, that usually they would rip up the star, but perhaps they didn't for some reason. Perhaps the star wasn't around, and then maybe he's taking advantage. So Rav Papa rules with the borrower, and Rav Nachman rules with the creditor. I'm sorry, the opposite. Rav Nachman says itra star, the star is weakened. He rules actually with the borrower. And Rav Papa, who says lo itra star, it's not weakened, rules with the creditor. Sorry, I said that the reverse. Now they're going to ask a question, Rav Papa. Rav Papa said the star is not weakened, the star stands. Ula Rav Papa, this, by the way, is like the previous sigur, where they don't exactly tell you, they're giving you principles. Person's a liar in the previous case. In this case, the star is weakened or isn't weakened, but then what does that mean, right? And then the commentaries have to try to figure out what was the ruling exactly. But we're going to deal with just the principles right now. Ula Rav Papa Mishna, why is this any different, though? They're going to ask Rav Papa. Rav Papa said the star is not weakened. However, in a different, seemingly completely parallel case, we don't weaken the star. He said the star the star is weakened. Okay? Here he said the star isn't weakened, meaning that the Malva can say, give me the money back, and that was for some other loan. But in this other case, the Malva is not going to be able to say that. So let's see the case, and let's try to figure out what the difference is. So why is it any different than the case where Amar Lechavre, person says to his friend, Havli me'azuze demasik nabach v'hashtara, pay me. Okay, sounds like it's starting out the same. Pay me 100 zuz that you owe me, and here's the shard that says you owe me the money. Amar le lavatori avitle, didn't you give me the money for me to invest in oxen? Basically buy oxen, slaughter them, sell them, whatever it might be. Va'atit va'itivat amasachta v'kabelet zuzah. And you came and sat with me in the slaughterhouse and got your money back. Okay? In other words, this was an investment you gave me, and I paid you back the investment in the slaughterhouse like he gives him a time, or not exactly a time, but a place. And we were sitting here. And don't you remember? I gave you back your money from your investment. V'amarle, hanu sitcha. And again, what is the Malva claim? Oh, that was a different arrangement we had where you gave me back the oxen or the money for the oxen. But Amar Rav Papa, and here Rav Papa is going to come and say the opposite of what he said, itra shtara. Once the Lova said this, and the assumption is that the Malva agreed with him, okay, that the original investors agreed that he had gotten the money back for the oxen, but claimed it was for something else, right? So he admits he got it back, but claimed it was for something else. Rav Papa said this weakens the shtar. Now, theoretically, it's the exact same case. Also in the previous case, The Malva agreed he had gotten money back. He just said it was for a different loan. So what's the difference between a loan and this business arrangement that they had about this investment? So the Gemara is going to give an answer. It's not so clear. I'm going to tell you the way I understood it, but I will say it's not so clear. Perhaps is a better way to understand it. Hatam kevan de ka'amar atora yavile umitora shakalt itrashtar. In that case, since the malva in the end agreed, in other words, the lova said the creditor or the borrower, who basically was borrowing for investment purposes, said, you gave it to me for the purpose of oxen, and I returned you oxen. And maybe because he gave such detailed explanation of where it was, and as if like there really was a situation like this, and or maybe because I think the real reason is we're talking about oxen, okay? And I'll get to it in a minute. So ha'cha'im or sitrainin, but in the loan case, we can say it was just another loan. Now, I think it's just rare that people give people money for oxen specifically and then give the money back for oxen. It's very hard to say that there was another arrangement made and there was no document about it or anything else. That's unlikely that there were two like that. And therefore, he's not believed, the one who gave the money. But in the case of a loan, like it's very common. Again, it doesn't say this inside, but I think it's because loans are just common. So it's very likely that they had a loan that was an oral arrangement, whereas it was unlikely that he had two investments going with oxen and got one back and not the other. It just doesn't make much sense. So that's how we distinguish between the two cases. Now they want to know, okay, so that was just a question about Rav Papa, but now we go back to the basic machlok. Rav Nachman says, the star is weakened and the malva can't collect the money again and can't claim, oh, it was just for another loan you gave me the money back for. Rav Papa says, lo iter star, the star stands and the malva, the creditor, can get the money back. So my havele, what's the halacha? Rav Papi amar lo iter star, Rav Sheshet b'reid Rav Idi amar iter star. So now we have Rav Papi holds like Rav Papa and Rav Sheshet, the son of Rav Idi, holds like Rav Nachman. But so that doesn't really help us. But then the Gemara says, the halacha is itra star. We end up holding like Rav Nachman, that the star is weakened and the malva can't get the money back. The malva is not believed to say, oh, that was for some other loan. V'hane mile, but this is only true. Depare ba'apesade velo id karle shtare. That's only, by the way, the malva is not going to be believed if it was given back in front of witnesses. Okay, these next words are kind of unnecessary, which is, and they didn't mention the star, which means really, even if they didn't mention the star. In other words, if the creditor got the money back and there were witnesses that saw the creditor get the money back, even if there was no discussion that this related to that star, the malva has nothing to say. And we don't really know, in other words, basically since there's witnesses to see that the malva got the money back and it matches the amount that it said in the star, the malva has no chance. But this is why it's not so clear yet why, but the foil is going to show you. Aval pari ben didei didei, if the creditor got the money back without anybody seeing, okay, and it was just between the lova and the malva. Now we're going to go into amigo. Remember amigo is how they work? Amigo, we haven't had one in a while for what I remember, but amigo is from the fact that you could have given a better claim and you used a worse claim, that makes you believable. So if there were no witnesses that witnessed this whole interaction, okay, of the borrower returning the money to the creditor, migo diyacha lememer, we're now going to trust the malva who says it was from a different loan. Why? Because the malva could have just said lo yudvayu me'olam. The malva could have completely denied, and since the malva has the star in hand, the malva could go collect it again. If there was no evidence that the money was ever paid back, if the malva was lying, the best lie for the malva is just say, I never got the money. It's definitely a more convincible lie than, oh, I got the money, but it was for something else. So therefore, and therefore the malva will be believed because the malva gave a worse claim. So if the malva was lying, we assume we would have made a better claim, and therefore the fact he made a worse claim, which is I got the money, but it was for some other loan, we're going to believe the malva. So now we're going to limit it. So we're going to say the star is weakened, but only if the loan was returned in front of witnesses. And as we saw in a case with Avimi, the son of Rabbi Eliezer, which came up in Ketubot, where there was a case like this, where there were no witnesses, and the guy said there was someone else, and the malva was believed. Okay. Next case. We're going to have a few cases like this, where when the person goes to borrow money, they say, listen, If we ever, now this is something a lova would say, if you want to borrow money, you want to convince the person loaning you the money that you're going to return your money. So what do you say? Say, listen, I promise that if we get into an argument down the road and you claim that I didn't pay you back and I say I did, I'll go with what you say. Now, if that's the case, azapari ba'apesade. Now, what happened in this particular case? The love returned the money in front of witnesses. And then what happened? The malvik claimed, never got my money. Now, what did the lova say? You'll be believed if you say that. On the other hand, there were witnesses. So, Abaye v'Ravadam retravayu ha'emne. Abaye and Rava say, the malva is believed because the lova said, I'll believe you, whatever you say. If you say I didn't pay you back, even though there's witnesses. But you said you'll trust the person, so the person is believed. Matkefla Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, what are you talking about? When the lova said, I'll believe you if you say it was paid back, that means if I claim I paid you back and you say I didn't, and there's no witnesses to it. But obviously, if there's witnesses, there's witnesses. What? I'm not an idiot, right? You could always claim on me then. No, obviously, that's why I returned it to you in front of witnesses. So I wasn't believing you in the place of witnesses. Next case. So that's an interesting machloket. Abaye and Rava really are surprising here, right? We take your words to the end. You said the other side will be believed, the other side's believed. Someone said to his friend, you're believed to me like two witnesses. Now, this is already different because you say, oh, believe like two witnesses. Then if two witnesses come for sure, the malva will still be believed. Okay, so now you'll be believed like two witnesses. Right? If I claim it wasn't paid back and you say it was, you'll be believed. I'm sorry. Sorry, I said that wrong. As long as the malva says, lo parana, I didn't get the loan back, I'll believe you. Okay, and I'll have to pay you. As you're believed as two witnesses. So now what's the question? Obviously, if two witnesses come, if I return the loan in front of two witnesses, obviously, and the malva says, I didn't pay it back, of course I'm going to have to believe the malva. But also pari ba'petzlata. I brought it back in front of three witnesses. So I added one more than what I said. I said the person will be believed like two. So Amar Papa, kibei trei hemne, kibei tlata lo hemne. Again, Rav Papa saying, well, I said you'd be believed like two. I didn't say you'd be believed like three. And that's why I gave it back in front of three so that I could have one up on you. But Amar le Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua Rav Papa. Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua says to Rav Papa, what are you talking about? Imur de Amar Rabbanit Delina Batarov Deot. Where numbers count, like three is more than two. When is that? Hanimile linyan umdana. That's when we're doing assessment of land. To come in because if we're trying to assess the value of land, the more people on one side is better than the less people on the other side is stronger because they're trying to figure out, right? We assume more people have more knowledge, and we'll get to, like, if you think about averages, right? We'll get to a better, more accurate number the more people we have. So if 5 people say it's worth 100 and 3 people say it's worth 50, we're going to go with the 100 assessed. Okay? Avalinian edut, but when it comes to witnesses, all you need is 2 witnesses. And what have we learned many times? Me edim ketrei utrei kemea. 2 witnesses, 100 witnesses are like 2 witnesses. They're no stronger than 2. And 2 witnesses are like 100 witnesses. So basically 2 is like 3. It's all the same. So if I said the mob is going to be believed like 2, then the mob is going to believe like 3 or like 100. And me giving it back in front of 3 witnesses is not going to help. So that's Rav Huna's question on Rav Papa. But Lishana Achrina, but there's a different version of the Sugya, which is kind of similar, but a little bit different. It's going to start off the same. I believe you like 2 witnesses. Returned it in front of 3. And again, Amar Rav Papa, and Rav Papa says, I'll be believed that I returned in front of 3 because 3 is more than 2. Matkefla Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yeshua, and again, Rav Huna, son of Rav Yeshua, comes to go against this, but instead just simply says, not this whole long-winded line, but about the umdana and all that, just says trei kamei umeak trei, same idea. Okay, 2 is like 100, 100 is like 2. I'm not going to be believed. But he adds the following: Im amrale kebeit lata. But if I said to you, you'll be believed like 3. Now, I don't need to say 3 if I could say 2, right? Because 2 is the same as 3. So if I said 3, and then and then I returned it in front of 4 people, since I already added 1 to the 2 and started distinguishing What I really meant was like 3, but if I bring more than 3, then I'll be believed. If I said 2, I wouldn't be able to do that. But since 2 is like 100 and 3 is like 100 and all that, and basically once I said 3 and I specifically went in an atypical manner and said an atypical number, what I really meant was how many people. Okay, and then so even Rav Huna agrees in a case like that I would be believed, right? We have to also give me some way to return the money in a way that I'll be believed. Now we get to the more complicated part of today's stuff. Okay, the first line not so hard, but the next line will be a little more complicated. Okay, we don't swear on a claim of a cheresh shoteh and a katan. Okay, if they claim, right, that we owe them money, ve'en mashbi'in et hakatan, we don't have a katan take an oath either. My timer, tamar kra, ki tein ish al re'eu kesef ukelim lishmo, ve'en netinat katan klum. Right? It says ki tein ish. It has to be a person gave it and now is trying to claim it back. So the claim has to be a claim of a gadol and not of a katan. Okay, that's easy. Now we have the problematic line that when we read the Mishna, we said this clearly doesn't make any sense. Ein nishbein lekatan ulehekdesh. But you don't take an aval nishbein lekatan ulehekdesh, but you do take an oath to a minor and for sanctified property. But wait, we just said you don't take an oath for a katan, and then it says you take an oath for a katan. Those two lines completely contradict each other. For this, we're going to have 2 answers. The first one's quite complicated. The second one's a little simpler. It's quite complicated, meaning it's not so complicated, but the Gemara is going to take some time to figure out what we're talking about. Amar Rav b'ba b'tanat aviv. When we say katan, what we mean is, right now we think we mean a minor who's coming to claim money that the father was owed. Okay? Basically, the minor comes to someone and says, you owe my father money. Now, in this case, think about it. What did we just say? Why can't you swear to a katan? Because it says ki tein ish al re'ehu, right? The ish, first it was given by a person to re'ehu. Okay? Now, this was given to an ish because, right, or the ish was, the father was there in the beginning, gave out the loan. He was part of the whole thing in the beginning. He's just not here now. So therefore, you could say that we're gonna make the katan take the oath. Okay, so somebody comes claiming his father's owed money, and then the other person says, well, I only owe you half, right? I gave back the father half, I don't owe the other half, and then he swears to the katana moda b'mikta. And so that sounds simple, but we're seeing it's not going to be so simple. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and they explained whose approach is this. Well, it's actually a machlokah between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis, and our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay, here comes the start of the complicated part. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, what we're going to do now is we have Rav who says that the case in our Mishnah is Babatan out of Eve, and it's like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but we need to figure out what case is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov exactly talking about, and what's the machlokah between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the rabbis, and that's going to take us a little while, and we're going to end up with 2 different interpretations of this. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer, Pa'amim she'adam nishbal ta'anat atzmo. Sometimes, now what's a moda b'mitzad? A moda b'mitzad is, comes the creditor and says, you owe me money, and the borrower says, I agree I owe you half, I don't owe you the other half, or it doesn't have to be half, remember, it could be a pruta, out of shtei hakesef, whatever. So that's a moda b'miktzah, meaning someone claims and you have a counterclaim, and your counterclaim is on part of it you admit, part of it you deny. But sometimes someone could be nishbal ta'anat atzmo. They could come on their own volition. Okay, nobody claimed anything on them. They could come and say, listen, there was a loan for 100. Okay, we're going to read it right now. Ketzad amar lo manela avicha biyadi. Your father lent me $100. Or 100 zuzim, ve'achaltiv pras, and I returned half. Harei ze nishba. So if I come to you and I say, your father lent me 100, and I returned half, and you never said anything to me right now, that's what we think he's talking about. You don't know anything about this. I just come and I say on my own volition, and I'm modeh b'miktzah. Now it's weird, because I'm not modeh miktzah of the Tana that you claimed, but I am modeh miktzah of what the loan was. I could take an oath. V'zeu shenishbal tanat atzmo. And that's a case where someone can make would have to take an oath on their own claim. What are you talking about? When I say that, you had no idea there was money coming to you. That's like returning a lost item. You never would have known about it had I not said anything. And you don't have to take oaths on lost items. Nobody thinks that on returning lost items. Okay, so now we're going to try to figure this out. So why did Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov chayav Shevuot? And all the more so, it's very surprising because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov leili mishiva b'da patur. Doesn't he hold that if you return a lost item, you're exempt? You should hold that way, right? Everybody holds that way. So this doesn't make any sense. So we have to better understand this opinion. It can't be there was no claim, even though we said not that small, and that's why it's going to be a little complicated. It said a person could take an oath on their own claim when there's no counterclaim. So Rav again comes to explain, but this time he's not explaining our Mishnah, he's explaining Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but on that basis, we're going to explain our Mishnah. Katan. You are the child of someone who I owe money to, who's no longer around, and you are a minor. And you say to me, you owe my father money. And I say, you're right, there was a loan of 100, but I already paid back 50. And because it's a katan, we call this to'ein tanat atzmo, because your tana is not so important because you're a minor. On the other hand, right, so that's why it's like an in-between. So they say, wait a minute, if you're a katan, it can't be I have to take the oath to you because we already learned in our Mishnah. This doesn't make sense in light of our Mishnah. So it doesn't fit with that line in the Mishnah. If you're a katan claiming I owe your father money, why would I have to take an oath to you? So fine, they say, okay, now we're going to come up with the two interpretations. That was like the one interpretation that was obviously really not legit. But now we're going to try to explain. Lo olam gadol, okay, forget that you're a katan. Now we're changing you into a gadol. And you claim I owe your father money. And I say, right, am I karule katan? Why do we call you a katan? Well, katan dilagabe mile davua katanu. Because you're like a minor, because you're claiming a claim that's not your own. You're claiming a claim of your father's. And you weren't there, right? You're not your father. So sometimes we call children, right? You're the child of someone, and child often means minor, right? It's like a word we use interchangeably. Child can mean young, child can mean old. You could be a child and be 80 years old, or I don't know, it's unlikely, but you could be. You could be 80 and still have a parent alive, and we could still call you're the child of. So because you're claiming a claim as the child of, and the father's no longer around, we're calling you a katan, but you're really a gadol. Okay, now, what's the problem? This has to fit into the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, and that's why I'll have to take an oath to you. So there is a ta'ana. We thought in the first, he said, ein nishbal ta'anat, that's right. There's a case where you can be nishbal ta'anat, that's your own claim. So first we said, why is it your own claim? There must be a counterclaim. It doesn't make sense. Otherwise, you're really nishib avidah. How can Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? We said, it's called a counterclaim. It's called your own claim because the counterclaim was weak. It was a minor. I said, can't be that because you wouldn't have to take an oath. Okay. It's called like Tanat Atzmo because it was someone else's claim who was a gadol, okay? And therefore you do have to take an oath, but it's called Tanat Atzmo because they're claiming it for somebody else. Then they say, that still doesn't work with the words, Yachi Tanat Atzmo, Tanat Acherimi. That's a Tanat of somebody else. That's someone else. In other words, this is a real legit claim. It's someone's making a claim and you're denying it and they're a gadol. So they say, fine. So let's change the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Say it's Tanat Achirim ve'hodat atzmo. Someone made a claim and the person admitted to it. Okay. So we've changed Tanat Atzmo to Tanat Achirim and hodat atzmo. What's the problem? Well, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said this is a unique case where someone can make a claim and you were modeh b'miktzad and you have to then take an oath on behalf. So turning out on a bet, the Gemara says, Kulunami tanat achirim v'hodat atzmo ninu. That's the actual definition of modeh b'miktzad. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying there's a unique case, and then there's a machloka between him and the rabbis about this case. Now, if you claim that if we're claiming the Gemara, if Rav claims that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is talking about a case where it's a gadol, it's a child who's now of age, who's making a claim on behalf of their father, that's if we're gonna and that's called Tanat Atzmo, which we're now going to reread as Tanat Achirim ve'hodat atzmo, because there is a counterclaim made by a gadol. Well, then that's basically modeh b'miktzad. Okay, that's not unique. That someone's making a claim. I'm admitting to that doesn't make any sense. So we're going to explain it a little bit differently now. Ela b'derabba kamiflagei. And Rashi says here, and I don't want to get into this, but Rashi and Rabbeinu Hanan will have a debate here. Are we talking now? Are we back to saying it's actually a katan, or not necessarily a katan, but it's sort of not really important whether they're a katan or not, but just know it's not clear where we're going here. Do we mean that it was really a katan or it wasn't really a katan who was making the claim, the child? But the whole machloket here, we really have to understand why Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will say, I have to take a moed b'miktzat oath in that case, and the rabbis will say, I'm just a mishiv avidan and patur. So, b'dir Rabba kamifke. The machloket is, do they agree with Rabba? And here we finally get to what we've been waiting for, which is what's the reason for moed b'miktzat? But we're getting to a derech agav because we're going to say, is this the classic case of moed b'miktzat or not? Do we have to worry about what we normally have to worry about moed b'miktzat? And why does a moed b'miktzat have to take an oath? And we've mentioned this, but outside, not seeing it inside. To Amar Rabba, and this actually we saw 4 other times already in Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Ketubot, and Gitin. Okay, and this is why it should sound familiar for those who've been doing the daf for a while. To Amar Rabba, and basically we're going to say the machloka between Rabbi Eliezer and Yaakov and the rabbis is, do they agree with Rabba or not? Rabba says, Mipnei ma amra Torah modeh b'miktzat atana yishava. Why does a modeh b'miktzat have to take an oath? Chazaka ein adam me'iz panav b'fnei baal chavod. The first thing we have to understand is, if you lent me money, there's no way I would lie completely and say I don't owe you anything. That would be impossible. It's an impossibility that anybody would be so brazen to say such a thing. Okay, so why am I denying it? Well, really, I actually really want to deny the entire thing because I don't have the money to pay you back. But why don't I deny the whole thing? Mishum is because of what we just said. I would never be brazen enough to deny the entire claim. Well, that would lead me to then say I should really admit the entire amount. What's the problem? The reason why I'm not admitting to the full amount is I want to get you off my back. I figured until I get the money, I'll just lie and say I don't owe you the money. Later, I'll get the money and I'll then go and pay you back. And because of that, I'm suspicious. There's a big suspicion that I'm lying. In other words, this isn't what I'm actually saying. This is what the rabbis are assuming. They hear someone who's moed b'miktzat, they think this must be what's going through that person's head. And then because of that, Rahmana Amal, since we think that I really owe the whole amount and I'm just lying about half so I can push off paying you back, well, the rabbi said I better take an oath so that I'll admit to the whole claim because the scare, right? People are scared of taking false oaths. Then I'll admit. That's the goal of a moed b'miktzat. Now, that's Rabba. Now the question is how far to take Rabba. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Saval, lo shna bo, lo shna bibno, eino meiz, hilkach lav meshiv avedam. Now, is that the same thing with the son of? If I owe money, I borrowed money from you, so we said I wouldn't be chutzpahdik enough to lie in your face and say I don't owe you anything. But maybe in front of your son or your child, I wouldn't care. So that's the whole question. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, if you did something nice for me, then your child I'm going to treat the same way. And I'm also not going to lie in their face, which means I had no choice but to admit to part, which means I'm not a meshiv avedah. When I just come and claim I owe the money to the child, and let's say we go with Rashi and the child's a katan, so even if they made a claim, it doesn't matter. Their claim is meaningless. But I am basically not like I'm returning a lost item to you because I could never lie to your face completely and say, I don't owe you anything, because that would be really what we call kafui tova, like someone does something good to you, and then in their face or in their child's face, it's all one and the same. And therefore, it's classic moed b'miktzat, same thing. Rabbanan say, what do you mean? I would never lie to the face of the person who loaned me the money, but to their child, what do I care? Child never did anything for me. I'll lie completely, which means the fact that I didn't lie and I said I'm giving you back half, I'm actually like returning a lost item and I can't take an oath. I don't have to take an oath on the second part. Okay, that's the machloka between them. So that was all to explain the Mishna. So again, when it says and then says if a katan makes a claim that I owe the money, I don't take an oath if I'm moed b'miktzat because their claim is nothing. But if a child of a father and I take a loan from the father and the child claims I owe the money and I say I only owe you half, that, according to the rabbis, actually, I won't be chayav an oath, and that's not our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov who says I'm chayav an oath, because the same principle of motive mix-up would apply in the case of a child making a claim for a father. Now, perhaps even if only if they're minor, it's talking about perhaps talking even if they're grown up. That's not so much the issue right now. That means our Mishnah holds by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and not the rabbis. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute. How can you hold the Mishnahs like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Haktani Reisha, look at a different line in the Mishnah. Different line in the Mishnah holds exactly like the rabbis. Let's see. In our Mishnah it says, Mana la'aba biyadcha. Okay, you owe my father money. Or you owe my father money. My father gave you money when he was alive and he's not alive anymore. And I'm trying to claim it. That's a child. And you say I only have half. Okay, that's motiv b'miktzah to'en tanat aviv. It's the exact same case. Patul mipnei shemishiv avidal. That's Rabbi Eliezer. That's the rabbis completely. So you can't say the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov because there's a case that says it's the rabbis. So they say no. I have an answer for that. Hatam delo amar barili. Hachad amar barili. We're now going to split this case into two. There's a child who claims you owe the father money. Now, there's two ways the child can make the claim. One is for the child to say, I think you owe my father money. I think you didn't pay it back, but I'm not sure. If that's the case, then when you're motiv b'miktzah, you're actually mishiv avedah, even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And that's that line we just quoted in the Mishnah. But our line about nishmi'in lekatan is when the katan comes with a definitive. My father told me on his deathbed that you owe money. Give it back. That's a definitive claim. To that claim, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that you're not mishiv avedah and you be chayav, because you would never be brazen enough to lie in that kind of case. But if maybe you owe my father money, that's a different story. Okay, that was explanation number one of Nishbin Lekatan. Now comes explanation two. Shmuel has a different explanation. He thinks you're not Nishba in that case. Okay, he would hold the Mishnahs like the rabbis. It's Mishiv Avidah, Toin Tanat Aviv. What does it mean, Lekatan? We're talking about a regular case of taking money from an orphan. In other words, if you say to an orphan, your father owed me money, what did we learn? We learned this many times. You have to take an oath about it. Nishbin lekatan means lipara minechsei katan. If you want to go get money from orphans and say your father owed me money, well, right, what's the problem? The father's not there to say, I paid you back already. So you can only do that, right? You do that only by taking an oath. And that's what it means, nishbin lekatan. Totally different case, not a motiv b'miktzah case. Anyone who wants to make a claim against an orphan, right? Katan doesn't mean katan here, it means orphan, okay? Which often, again, yatomim, katan could be synonymous, even though it's not necessarily. And then this goes well with the hekdesh. What does it mean, nishbin lehekdesh? Li para minechsei hekdesh. If the borrower sanctified his property, which was lien to a loan, and the creditor goes to take it from the lien property, and it's now in the hands of the treasury, well, they have to take an oath that they didn't get the money already back from the lova. Now, what's the concern here? There's always the concern of what we call a knunya, that the lova and the malva will get together. Let's say the lova sold his property to Shimon, and then the lova goes to the malva one day and says, listen, I know I already paid you back that loan, but you know what? I'll give you back the shtar. You can go claim that I owe you the money, take my property back from Shimon, and then we'll split it 50-50. Okay? That's conspiracy. So we call it a knunya. So if you want to claim money either from hekdesh or from any really nechasim mishuabadim, you do it with an oath only, because you have to take an oath that you never got the money back. Otherwise, this third party has no idea whether it's the hekdesh or whether it's, a buyer. They have no idea whether the loan was paid back or not, and we're worried for this conspiracy. So you take an oath, and that's what this is telling you. What's the problem with this explanation? Well, there's already Mishnayot telling us both these halachas. So minichse lekatana, lipara minichse katan. Tanina, it already says in the Mishnah. Seeing that in the Mishnah in Gittin. Why do you need to say it twice? So Hakamashma no wants to tell you Kedabai Kashisha, like Abai the elder, Titane Abai Kashisha, Yitomim Shamru Gudolim, Bain Sarich Lamar Ktanim, Bain Lishvua, Bain Lisiburit. All the laws that apply to orphans whether they're minors or whether they're grown up already. It's just a law for orphans in general. And that's why we repeat it here, to tell you that we mean really orphans. Any orphans, doesn't matter the age. And also for the ziburit, which is whenever you collect property from orphans, it's always from the worst quality property, the least quality. Lahekdesh, liparamidechse hekdesh, also that tanina, as I said, minachasim mishuabadim, any lien property, mali mishuabadim lahedyo, mali mishuabadim lagaval. What's the difference if it was mishuabad to the temple? What's the difference if it was mishuabad to somebody, right? If it was sold to somebody else or it was sold to the hekdesh, they're all one and the same. still a concern that the malva and the lover are going to go and do a knunya. Well, no, it's true. You might have thought innocently, who's going to do a knunya on and steal from the temple treasury? That's unlikely. To steal from your neighbor, okay, who really cares, or whatever. Evil people will do that, but even evil people have a certain conscience and they won't steal from hekdesh. But this comes to teach you, no, we still have to worry that they're going to steal from hekdesh, and you have to take an oath. And that's the chiddush of the Mishna. So now they say, wait a minute, but we really do hold by this principle in Knunya al hekdesh, and we're going to see it right now. The person on their deathbed, on your deathbed, say, I'm giving all my property to the temple. But then says, oh, but wait, I owe 100 zuz to someone else. So take that away from the hekdesh. Ne'eman, they're believed. Why? Okay, we assume no one's going to steal from the hekdesh. So why here are we worried about it? Well, fasting. This is all fasting sugyo because it's all about what are people willing to do, what lines are they willing to cross. Well, if you're on your deathbed and you're not going to benefit from it at all, of course you're not going to steal from hekdesh. You have no self-interest here. But if you're still alive and you want to benefit from that money, yeah, you might steal from hekdesh. Okay? If you're going to steal, right, you might not have not enough conscience and you really don't care to steal from hekdesh. And that's why our Mishna says, if you want to get from hekdesh, you have to take it. So that's Shmuel's explanation of the katan and the hekdesh. The katan is an orphan. The hekdesh is lien property that got given to, right, that was given to the hekdesh that the malva wants to collect. Okay. And Rav again said katan. He didn't talk about the hekdesh. Presumably he would agree with Shmuel about the hekdesh. We don't know. But the katan is a katan who comes claiming money that the father was owed. New Mishnah. These are things that there is no moda b'miktzat oath, okay, or any oath really. Like, I guess, I think we're talking about also Shevuot Eid Echad and those. So, what are they? Avadim, vishtarot, karkaot, ve'ekteshot. The famous four. We've seen this in a number of sugyot. We're going to see drashot that we've seen before also. Slaves, documents, deeds, karkaot, land, and sanctified property, consecrated. And not only do you not take the oaths on them, there's no double payment if you steal them. Lo tashlumei arba v'chamisha, you don't have to pay the 4 or 5 times payment. Shomachin ameno nishba, all the shvuot hashomrim, that if you claim it was stolen, so you have to take an oath about it, and depending on which case and what you're claiming. Shomachin ameno nishba, no sechar eno mishalem. Okay, you're not going to have to pay or take oaths on these cases. Rabbi Shimon omer. He makes an exception about the sanctified items, and we've seen this before a number of times also. If you say, Harei alai, I have to bring a korban, and then you separate an animal, and then the animal gets lost, you have to replace it. Well, if that animal that you said, Harei alai, I'm going to bring, as opposed to this animal, if you say this animal is sanctified and the animal gets lost, you're not responsible. That's ein chayab achriyut. But if you're chayab achriyut, if something would happen to that animal, you'd have to replace it. That puts that animal at this point it means it's owned by you. As long as it's owned by you, all these laws will apply. So that means if I took this animal that I said, I'm going to bring a sacrifice to the temple, and then I designate the animal, and if the animal were to get lost, I'd have to replace it. If I give you that animal and then we have to do something about it, or that animal gets stolen, or all that stuff, that animal is considered my property and not sanctified property, even though I consecrated it. It's not considered consecrated. It's mine, which means that all these rules apply to it. That's what Rabbi Shimon's saying. So if they're chayav achrayut, nishbain. Not chayav, lo nishbain. Rabbi Meir Omer, yesh dvarim shehem bakalka ve'enam kekarka. There's some things that are in the ground that are considered detached from the ground. Another exception to a different case here. Ve'en chachamim modim lo. The rabbis don't agree. Ketzat. Eser kfanim te'unot masarti lecha. I gave you 10 vines full of grapes. And halal Omer enan alechamesh, and you say only 5. If we say it's karka, it's moda b'miktzat and no oath. But Rabbi Meir machayev shvuah, because they say those things are attached to the ground, but they were really metaltalin, they're grapes, right? And they could have been cut right then. So they're like detached, and therefore you'd have to take the oath. Chachamim omrim, no, kol mechubar lekarka, reu kekarka, as long as it's attached to the ground, it's considered like land. Einish bin ela davar shebemidah, shebemishkal, shebeminyan. It has to be something that can be weighed, measured, or counted. So, ketzad, here's an example. Bayit malei masarti lecha, I gave you a full house. V'kis malei masarti lecha, a full bag of money, but I didn't say how much was in it. I I don't know, but whatever you put, you should take. You're exempt. Okay. In other words, that's not a case of there's no clear amount here specified. If they gave a measurement until with that protrusion that's coming out or until the window, then that's already something that can be measured. The first thing we'll start with and then we'll end here is the source for this in the Torah, Tashlumei Kefil. And they're going to bring it from the Tashlumei Kefil. How do we know that there's no Tashlumei Kefil for those 4 items? And this is very famous. We've seen it a number of times. Tanu Rabbanan, Al Kol Dvar Pesha Klal. This is the pasuk about paying double. On any Pesha, that's general. Al Shor Al Chamor Al Sal Sama. And then we said on an ox, on a donkey, on a sheep, or a cloth, like a clothing item. Prat. Al Kol Abeda Chazar V'Kalal. Then it says on any lost item. That's already a generalization. Klal upratu klal yatadan elakena prat. It has to be like the prat. Now we're going to go through what typifies all these things. Ma prat before us davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon. It's movable and it's got inherent value. Av kol davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon. It has to be movable and it has to have inherent value. Yatsu karkaot she'em mitaltel. Land is not movable. Yatsu avadim shukshu lekarkaot. We said this many times. Avadim knanim Canaanite slaves are said you pass them on as nachalat to your children. So therefore, they're like land because they're called nachalat. Yatsu shtarot she'em mitaltelin. Now, documents are movables. However, in gufam mamon, they have no inherent value. And hekdesh is from a different word because it says re'eyu k'tiv, your friend, and not the hekdesh. From there, we learned the source for kefil. From there, we'll go on to the others. Okay, so what we do today, we started with these cases of fights between Malv and Lova. Was it payback? Was it not? Who's believed in what case? In all different cases, and we went through. Then we got to the Nishbe'in L'Katan, and what does that mean? And we saw Rav's explanation and Shmuel's explanation because it really contradicted the previous line. Nishbe'in L'Katan, it has to be some unique case. Either Katan is claiming Katana for their father, and then the question is, right, does Tana, the whole Modeh B'Miktzat theory, apply to a child? And the Mishnah says, yes, it does, and that's why you swear. And according to the rabbis, not, but that's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Or Shmuel said it's actually just talking about someone trying to get money from orphans has to take an oath, just like in Hekdesh have to take an oath. And then we went through what's unique about why is it telling us here when we already know this from other Mishnayot. And from there we went to the Mishnah about what are the 4 exceptions to the rule, where there's no Modeh B'Miktzat. And once we're mentioning that, there's also no Kefel Tashlumei Arba B'Chamisha, etc. With that, we finish for today and pick up from here tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day.